In this video, I'm going to defend masculinity and explain how it transformed my life and turned me into the person I want to be. And then I'm going to explain why I stopped believing in it. And explain the real downsides that despite everyone talking about it, no one seems to notice. And then, I'm gonna suggest an alternative that young men and women on self-improvement can use as their North Star without the side effects. Hi, my name is Xander. I use philosophy to talk about how we can improve ourselves and our community, and this is why I stopped idealizing masculinity. This was me at 18 years old, barely 64 kilograms and about as insecure as it's possible to be. I'd spent the past 6 years attempting to form something of an identity for myself. I tried fandom, but quickly realized I was only emulating the opinions of the critics who I respected. I tried politics, only to immediately encounter older men who knew a lot more than I did. More than anything, I just wanted to be someone, because at the bottom of all of this, I just felt this general air of worthlessness. And I mean that in a technical sense. Worthlessness. Lacking worth. If someone needed wisdom, I had none to offer. If someone wanted a party, I was never a good drinker who could be the center of attention. My worth was defined by my attributes, and I didn't have any. My physical insecurities weren't a social thing, not a fear of what people would think of me. They were a physical manifestation of that worthlessness which I felt inside. And then this video hit my feed. How to actually win a street fight by Hamza. I watched this video with bated breath because it felt like for the first time somebody was speaking in a language which actually understood me. For those that don't know, Hamza is your standard men's self-improvement influencer who's pretty popular, covering standard topics like gym, business, and health. But what makes him unique is the philosophy he uses to communicate this advice. In Hamza's view of the world, there are two kinds of men. There are Jeffreys, men who distract themselves with pleasure, refuse to work hard, and are cruel to others to compensate. And then you have Adonis, a towering, muscular, Greek statue of a man who everybody wants to be like. The goal being to make that transition from Jeffrey to Adonis. What was being promised here was a unique blend of grandma advice, improving diet and sleep, the basic acknowledgement that status and money matter and that it's okay to attain them, and a third, more spiritual angle, that the point of all of this was not for ego and hedonism, but to give back to your family, community, and brothers. And this masculine worldview, empirically, worked. In the span of about 2 years, I went from insecure with little going for me to building a body I was proud of. I started public speaking to improve my confidence, and soon enough started winning competitions. I took up MMA and built and grew my account to 100,000 followers. I tried harder in uni and my grades reflected that. Simply put, masculinity transformed me as a person. But by now you're probably asking yourself the obvious question. Why did I need masculinity to do this? I mean, there are fantastically talented female athletes and speakers, and many men who've achieved much more than this without ever caring about this stuff. The issue at hand can best be summarized by this question. Why did I need to become a good man instead of just becoming a good person? Well, here's where some cognitive science comes in. Humans have a lot of things they gotta worry about. There's our physical health, our need for love from others, our access to resources, our need for spiritual peace, what to do when threatened, what to do when sick. Should I go to this university? Should I take this job? Should I be monogamous? Should I start a business? What time should my bedtime be? These questions aren't just difficult to answer individually, but their answers need to be compatible, fitting together to create a coherent life, creating the compound problem of compatibility. And so the solution to this perennial problem that humans have been using for generations is to follow what I call a path. Here, I'm defining a path as any system of thought which organizes the world around you by telling you who you are and what you're called to do. There's the path of the artist, which tells you every day to improve your craft. There's the path of the Christian, which tells you to love Jesus. And then there's the path of the real man that takes you from Jeffrey to Adonis. But these pathways don't just tell you what to do, they motivate you to do them. The aesthetics of masculinity as a meme digs so deep into Western culture and has evolved uniquely to galvanize the neurology of men, such that if you've lived as a man, you probably have a number of lived experiences that masculinity can directly speak to. Masculinity carries an emotional valence that can motivate you towards behaviors in a way that the mere propositional notion that it would be a good idea to never could. But if you're still unconvinced, if you think all of this is unnecessary because you're some hyper-rationalist mentat who individually decides every decision in life by calculating its benefits and never has issues with motivation, then there's still one more thing a path can provide you that you could never have found on your own: community. If you come up with some proprietary, never-seen-before philosophy on life, then good luck finding someone who's compatible with you. When I look at all of these photos taken from the peak of the self-improvement movement circa 2022, I see hundreds of people who were told for the first time in their life that they could aspire to be something they were proud of, who took their mental health seriously, who ate well, who quit their addictions, and looked damn good doing it. Hell, I might even have taken a few of these photos myself. Masculinity has been one of the most beneficial pro-social movements, and there's really no denying that. But I must confess that I'm leaving something out. When the roots of a tree become diseased, that tree can continue to grow without anyone noticing. Its trunk can become strong, its canopy wide, but as long as that rot is still present at the base, that disease can spread, cracking at the stem and causing the tree to topple over. And I'm afraid that this apple is rotten right to the core. It's time to talk about the parts of masculinity they don't tell you about. So, in order to critique masculinity, we're going to need to understand exactly what it is and how it works on a mechanical level. And to do that, we're going to need an example. In August of 2025, Raja Jackson, son of three-time MMA world champion Rampage Jackson, attended a wrestling event while streaming. Being a tough-looking guy who had cameras around him, one of the wrestlers, who goes by the moniker Psycho Stu, assumed that Raja was a fellow performer, and so hit him with a fake prop can. Raja naturally looked pissed off by this mistake, and it was at this point that Psycho Stu realized the person he hit wasn't an actor, and so apologized profusely for the mistake, saying sorry at least 3 times. I didn't know. I thought you were. Now, I'd like you to imagine how you'd react in this situation. Any normal person, while being rightfully annoyed, would understand that this was an accident, forgive, and simply move on. But this isn't what Raja did. You see, Raja was receiving messages in his chat calling him a bitch for not fighting back, saying that he needed to prove that he was a man.
Why didn't you fuck that guy up?
Now, wanting to turn the moment into a stunt, Psycho Stu gave Raja permission to enter the ring during his next fight and do a wrestling throw on him as an in-story revenge. But what followed has to be censored for YouTube. Raja proceeded to pick Psycho Stu up and throw him to the ground in a way that bashed the back of his head against the ring. Raja then proceeded to punch Stu's unconscious body 22 times, with most of those strikes landing to his head. Stu was admitted to the emergency room, losing several teeth, fracturing a bone in his face, and causing life-threatening concussions. Stu has since been forced to retire from wrestling. Okay, that's certainly an emotionally valent story, but before I analyze what it means, I'm gonna have to give 2 caveats. 1. A lot of arguments about so-called toxic masculinity do this annoying thing where they bring up cases of a man doing something bad, then try to imply guilt by association against all of masculinity, as if that constitutes some kind of argument. So I'd like to reassure you that that's not what I'm doing here. Instead, I am merely bringing this up for the same reason that scientists measure particles at ultra-high temperatures, or linguists study the learning patterns of hyperpolyglots, because extreme cases make clear the underlying patterns that may exist to a milder degree in general populations. And caveat 2, some of you might be screaming at your screens right now, claiming that real masculinity is about lifting yourself and others up. Therefore, any flaw in a man's behavior I show is definitionally not real masculinity, and thus not a valid example. Under this view, because masculinity is a force for positivity in the world, toxic masculinity is an oxymoron. But that's a philosophical claim, analyzing the properties of masculinity as a metaphysical object. But this video isn't about critiquing masculinity as a philosophy, I'm critiquing masculinity as a meme. Purely descriptively, there is a pattern of thinking and behavior that tends to have pros and cons, and descriptively, people tend to call that thing masculinity. That fact is the thing I'm critiquing, and while I will certainly address metaphysical arguments towards the end of this video, until you get a large percentage of the population to adopt your worldview, it's just not what I'm concerned with. So, with those caveats out the way, let's take a look back at Raja. Here is a clip of him leaving the wrestling venue.
I'm tired of everybody fucking playing with me and shit. Think I'm always playing and shit. Call me bitch and shit. Not no fucking bitch, bro. At the end of the day, I'ma stand up for my fucking self because I'm tired of everybody fucking playing with me, bro. Real shit.
To state the obvious here, Raja is insecure. And what I mean by that is that he is not a man who believes on a fundamental level that he is okay. He does not believe that his existence alone is enough. Instead, he believes that his worth stems from something else, perhaps an honor to defend or glory to earn, and it was this insecurity, this need to prove something, which motivated his attack. Listen again to his words.
Think I'm always playing and shit. Call me bitch and shit. Not no fucking bitch, bro.
It's clear that Raja's inner contentment depends on people not thinking that he's a bitch. He can only feel anything approaching self-worth if he believes he has earned it through hierarchical competition. Or, in other words, he believes in meritocracy. Meritocracy in politics refers to the idea that people should receive rewards equal to what they've earned. And what Raja appears to be trapped in is an emotional form of this idea, whereby self-worth is reserved only for those who can compete for it. And once you've spotted this pattern of thinking, you start to see it everywhere. Think about everything we associate with masculinity. Gym, stoicism, wealth, achievement, health, maybe even right-wing politics. What all of these have in common is that they are all aggressively meritocratic. And this kind of mindset can be seen all over masculine messaging. Just take a look at those bzz edits that are all over YouTube. All of these videos start the same. There is depressing music as we see clips of unhealthy people, social justice, men admitting it's okay to be weak. In fact, this one clip appears in almost all of these videos. But then the music rises and the video kicks into high gear, and you see the contrast of the men who you're supposed to idealize. Athletes, fathers, business owners, bodybuilders. Aragorn. And the message here is clear. These men have worth, these don't. In masculine spaces, worth is not something that all humans have by default. It's something you earn. Now, caveat number 3, humans are not machines. What I'm pointing out here is not the first line of a syllogism I think everyone's following, but just a general pattern of thinking that tends to underlie these things. There are billions of men on the planet, and thus billions of perspectives of this, all of which are slightly different. Not everyone will fall into the exact way of view I'm describing, but a very large number of people will have at least a piece of this philosophy within them. Because it's difficult to be a man in the first world without at least a little bit of this creeping into you. And if it wasn't obvious by this point, everything I've said about masculinity tends to be the exact opposite within feminine culture. Think about everything we associate with female spaces. Acceptance of weakness, caring for infants, body positivity, mental health, left-wing politics. All of these factors assume the worth of an individual is inherent, that everybody is worthy of love. Women's ads say, improve yourself because you're worth it. Meanwhile, the equivalent for men says, improve yourself because if you fail to do so, you're worth less. So what does this mindset do to your brain? Well, to put it in video game terms, it's like having a player character who dies in a single hit. So you're forced to build up a bubble around yourself, made of achievements and accolades as a defense. So naturally, the second that anything threatens that bubble, you have to act in a scarcity mindset. You are forced to defend yourself with all the behaviors that you've heard called out 1,000 times. Maybe you're quick to put other people down and make jokes that are just a bit too mean, because somebody in the friend group being perceived as having a higher status of you would pop the bubble. Refusing physical touch with your friends because you're convinced that it's gay and being perceived as gay would pop the bubble. Denying or refusing help for physical and mental health issues because having an issue would pop the bubble. Using women as props because not being seen as actively desirable would pop the bubble. Cutting off and refusing to support friends because you can only view those around you as allies and assets to your goals rather than humans. After all, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not being surrounded by lions would pop the bubble. Hell, maybe you renounce and get into a public pissing match with your former best friend because you feel like relatively benign comments of him were personal attacks against you. And a person who you formerly helped not giving you the respect you feel you deserve would pop the bubble. Meanwhile, anyone in the feminine mindset has no reason to develop these maladaptive traits. And I think that a lot of women intuitively understand this fact, even if they might not put it in the same words as me. Which often leads girls to say things like, if men just ditched this stupid masculinity thing, all of their problems would be fixed. And sure, in the more extreme cases, that tends to be true, but what's insidious about masculinity is that even if you don't believe in it yourself, you are still touched by it. Consider a man who doesn't believe in or even think about any of this masculinity stuff. If he is still surrounded by a society that has these beliefs about him, then in the process of learning how to survive in that society, he will begin acting like someone who believes masculinity is real, through no fault of his own. Humans are like water. They contort to the shape of the container holding them. And therefore, acting like masculinity is something that men psychologically impose on themselves is just victim blaming. You know, I was talking to my brother the other day, and he told me that he tends to avoid talking about his mental health. Not because he believes that men shouldn't, but because it's just generally a low return on investment. And I think that's true of most men. Contrary to these ad campaigns like Movember, I don't think it's true that men avoid discussing their feelings because they want to be a real man. They do it because they're worried that people around them won't give a shit. To most men, masculinity is not a philosophy they follow, it's an emergent effect of reacting to how people treat you. A philosophy is something that you can just drop. An emergent social survival strategy isn't. And that cocktail of sometimes pushing meritocracy on myself as a byproduct of wanting to adopt a philosophy for self-improvement, and sometimes having it forced upon me, takes a psychological toll. So, do you remember when I told you how I first got into masculinity YouTube? It was from a video teaching me how to fight. But why was fighting something that I valued? Does hurting others help the world? Is hurting others a high predictor for happiness? No. It was because, under the meritocratic framework, my small size made me unable to compete in the domain of physical aggression, unable to prove my worth. And so what else could I have felt other than worthlessness? Now, sure, eventually I got better, I reached the top 10% of male strength, I competed in competition, and now could probably suplex most guys I encounter. But where does that actually leave me? It sure as hell didn't complete me. Didn't solve that black hole I felt at the center of my being. Because at the end of the day, if you surround yourself with a bubble, if you layer accomplishment after accomplishment over a fundamentally worthless sense of self, well then there you go. You still have a fundamentally worthless sense of self. When I see guys giving themselves strokes with steroids, ruining their marriages for their careers, dropping friendship over hierarchical disputes, treating women like trophies for status, I see the same thing as when I look at a heroin addict. Masculinity, the rewiring of my brain into the non-stop pursuit of becoming Adonis, left me with climbing as my only coping mechanism. When you know what I actually needed back then? For someone to tell me that I was, fundamentally, at the core of my being, enough. That I deserved to be loved as nothing more than myself. But instead of learning to love myself intrinsically, I spent the best part of the last 4 years erecting an identity that optimized ego as a crutch for the fact that I couldn't. Earning self-love is an oxymoron, because if my self-love is dependent on me having enough evidence of worth, then I'm not the thing being loved. The evidence is. The other day, I was journaling, and I tried writing this sentence. I am intrinsically worthy of love. I have run actual marathons before. I have dragged my shin-splintered legs over the finish line through freezing winters, and yet writing this sentence was somehow harder to do than any of that. That's how tightly meritocracy had wrapped its tendrils round my spine. That is what masculinity taught me to do. So, what's the solution to all this? So, let's recap. Masculinity is an exceedingly positive force in the lives of millions of men. Myself and others have used it to drag ourselves out of the pits we were born in, avoided becoming a statistic, and truly made something of ourselves. But it also has flaws. If you tell a generation to only find value in their accomplishments, they atrophy their ability to find value in themselves. So what's the solution? If your answer is just femininity, then please understand that what you're providing is the opposite of a solution. Because while you're ditching its downsides, you're also ditching its upsides. Men need purpose, they need to be a part of something, and femininity can't provide that en masse. And so, to find a worldview that can balance these two needs, I suggest that we take inspiration from Christianity. Under Christianity, man is made in the image of God. We are his children, and God, who, might I remind you, is objectively correct about everything, loves us. If that isn't intrinsic value, I don't know what is. In his book, The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis calls this kind of love charity. Love for a stranger, not because you know them or because they've earned it, but love just because they're human. The inherent assumption that all humans are worthy of it. The kind of love that tells you to hold each other up and forgive when necessary. The kind of love that can't be toxic, even in excess. The kind of love that tells everyone that you're good enough. But under Christianity, just because you're good enough, that isn't an excuse for inaction. After all, someone's got to get out of bed every morning and go on missions for the church, and if you're doing that, you may as well be motivated and healthy and fit and well slept. The difference here being that instead of improving yourself because you need it, you're improving yourself because it's the virtuous thing to do. You are perfect just the way you are, and you should improve yourself. Now, if it's not clear how what I'm describing here differs from masculinity, you can think of it like a carrot versus a stick. Masculinity presents a stick, telling you that you will feel worthless unless you live up to its expectations, whereas the Christian view tells you you're good enough where you are, but offers the carrot of telling you will actively be virtuous if you choose to go down this path. Now, I'm not religious, and I never will be, and I'm guessing if you're the type of person who watches my channel, you're in the same boat. And so what I want to ask is, could we build a secular movement based on the same principle? A movement that assumes humans are valuable by default. A movement of self-improvement driven not by masculinity, but by virtue, that assumes the inherent worth of humans and calls its adherents to acknowledge that daily, leaving us with nothing to prove, while still acknowledging the right thing to do in all moments is to wake up and work out how to be 1% better than you were yesterday. And when I think of the world in those terms, suddenly that sentence in my journal, I am intrinsically worthy of love, doesn't seem so difficult anymore. In fact, it's kinda embarrassingly obvious. And this hasn't come at the expense of my motivation. I'm in a park in cold British weather talking to a camera because I believe in this idea. Removing my need to work in order to feel worthy didn't remove my work ethic, it just allowed me to do it in a much healthier way. And that message is the sentiment I want to carry forward with this channel. To jumpstart a movement where both genders are using virtue philosophy for self-improvement in both a physical and spiritual sense. And if that sounds like something that you want to be a part of, I implore you to subscribe and also to join my Discord community. I want this conversation to keep going and am highly considering starting up a forum for long-term discussion. But for the time being, this server is where I'm going to be organizing myself and the beginning of whatever this movement turns out to be. You matter. We all do. And our works matters, and the philosophy we use to achieve said works matters. And as long as you agree with that, you are welcome in this space. Together, let's build something cool.